Hi, and welcome back to Biblical Theology, Exegesis, and Hermeneutics, where meaning is always context-driven. I'm your host, John Strazicich, and today we'll be continuing on in our study in the book of Hebrews in chapter 11, and today we'll be dealing with the Patriarchal Narratives. Okay, and coming to this particular slide, we have our text here, and so we'll offer up a translation, and on the next slide we'll look at a little bit of structure. And if you have your Bibles, we're here at Hebrews 11:8. By faith, when Abraham was called, he obeyed to go forth to a place which he was about to receive for an inheritance. And he went forth, although not knowing where he was going. By faith, he sojourned in the land of promise as a foreigner, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, co-heirs of the same promise. For he was awaiting a city having foundations, whose architect and builder is God. By faith, Sarah also herself, sterile, received strength for the foundation of seed, and being beyond the time of age, since she considered faithful the one who promised. Therefore, just as the stars of the heaven in multitude, and as the sand beside the edge of the sea innumerable, were also born from one man, and in these matters, one who has been dead. Okay, verse 13. In accordance with faith, these all died, although not receiving the promises, but seeing them from afar and greeting and confessing that they were strangers and pilgrims upon the earth. For those who say such things explain that they are seeking out a homeland. And if they were mindful of that place from which they had gone out, they would have had time to return. But now they are desirous of something greater, that is, of heaven. Therefore, God is not ashamed of them to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. By faith, Abraham offered Isaac when tempted, and the one who had received the promises offered up the only begotten one, to whom it was spoken, in Isaac your seed shall be called, thinking that God is also able to raise from the dead. Therefore, he received him in parabolic fashion. By faith, concerning things to come, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau. By faith, Jacob, while dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, and he worshipped upon the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, while coming to an end, was made mention concerning the exodus of the sons of Israel, and he gave instructions concerning his bones. Okay, so I stopped there because, we're just looking here at certain time frames, like we looked at the antediluvians before, and then this time we'll look at the patriarchal narratives, and then the next one we'll take up Moses and the Exodus. But anyhow, so this is our translation here for our text. Okay, and coming here to this particular slide, we're coming to look at some structure for the passage to kind of get a handle on what we're looking at here today. And so last time we looked here at the introductory statements and the example of faith from the antediluvians in 1-7. And so today we're looking here at the examples of faith from the patriarchs. And that's going to take us up from 8 to 22. And so within this section here, there's three clear defined units here. And the first one is basically the initial acts of faith of the patriarchs here, basically of Abraham and Sarah here in verses 8 to 12, which basically, it's his initial move out of Ur the Chaldees, and then his sojourning, and then the faith for the birth of Isaac. And that pretty much takes up this particular unit here in 8 to 12. And then the heart of this passage for our author here is his didactic unit here. And I entitled this "The Author's Commentary on How the Patriarchs Died in Faith Awaiting the Promises." And that's gonna take up verses 13 to 16, and it begins with an authorial statement concerning how they all died in faith, and then it takes up these four conditional adverbial participles, the conditions of how they died in faith, and then it's based on a contrast here. And that's taken up here in alpha and beta, and it's followed by a basis clause and a hypothetical condition, followed by a contrastive unit here that's based on a Mendel construction here, and that is in verses 15 to 16a, and then it rounds out here with an inferential therefore statement of a divine outcome of approval upon the patriarchs, and a basis for rewards. And then the final section is the patriarchs' final acts of faith here, and so we have the final testing of Abraham at the Akedah of Isaac, the binding of Isaac, when God tested him to offer up his son. And then it ends out with the dying acts of faith of the patriarchs of Isaac and Jacob and Joseph here, and so it's nicely put together. And then the next unit's going to go into Moses and the Exegesis generation, and it's going to continue on being grouped in time periods. But anyhow, so this basically makes up the gist of the structure for the unit that we're looking at. Okay, and then coming here, we'll look at Harold Attridge's initial remarks concerning our unit here. And he says, the understanding of faith that emerges from the definition of 11.1 and from the examples that follow is rich and complex, exemplifying as clearly as any element in Hebrews the intricate fusion of biblical and Hellenistic traditions that characterizes the whole of the text. Although the specific examples of faith from the Old Testament are not adduced because that virtue is explicitly attributed to them, faith, and we'll look here at Emunah and Aman and He'emin here in the Hifil. Faith is clearly an important category in the Old Testament and in post-biblical Judaism. At the risk of some oversimplification, the distinctive legacy of this tradition may be said to be the understanding of faith in affective and behavioral terms. Faith is equivalent to fidelity, trust, and obedience, and it aptly summarizes the total relationship between human beings and Yahweh. The emphasis on faithfulness or fidelity especially to the covenant, is commonplace in post-biblical Jewish literature. So what we're looking at here today is that faith that endures, and I think this is what Attridge here is looking at, and today we're looking at people who had faith that the promises were never realized. But they died in faith, knowing that God and His promises were real, and that they were, Abraham ultimately was looking for the city to come, whose foundations were from God's building this. He's the architect and builder of the city, and so this is the heavenly city. And I guess that, in one sense, looking at it from a canonical point of view, you'd have to go to the book of Revelation when we see the New Jerusalem coming down out of heaven, because that is the ultimate state that we find ourselves in after there's a new heaven and a new earth. There's this heavenly city, and it's important, I think, that you should note that the reason why Abraham was looking for this city whose architect and builder was God, because Abraham came out of Ur the Chaldees, out of this city of Ur-Nammu, in southern Iraq, which was famous, for Ur-Nammu's law code as well as the ziggurat, and we'll see some pictures of that later on in here. And so Abraham left this magnificent city of the third dynasty of Ur, and because I believe he was born somewhere around 2166. I think that's the if you follow the Old Testament text, that's the numbers that you're going to come up with, and taking the early date for the Exodus, which follows 1 Kings chapter 6. So of course we're just going to follow that particular chronology. But anyhow, so that really, to anchor Abraham in with Ur 3, and that he came out of this big, magnificent city of Mesopotamia, from the Ur 3 dynasty, to then dwelling in tents for the rest of his life. So God was is going to reward him with a city whose foundations are God is the architect and builder. And so anyhow, that is what we're looking at here today. Okay, and then I wanted to provide this particular slide to you. I don't think I want to go over it, but Peter Bryan also kind of sets up the text and divides it somewhat similarly to what I did. Maybe it's a little different, but his thoughts were cogent, and I have them here. You can stop the slides here and check out what he has to say. Okay, and so now coming here to this particular slide, what we're going to, this is verse 8 here, and we're going to go ahead and look at this, diagrammatically and exegetically. We'll just wrap it all up into one. And so what we have here is we have this compound sentence. We have Abraham as our subject, and we have the first baseline based upon hupe kusin here, aorist active verb here from hupakuo, and then it's followed here and joined by kai to our second verb in the baseline here, ex elthen, from ex erchomai. So we have a pair of these, basically these aorist active verbs here, forming this compound sentence, and it's sandwiched in between with the relative clause here, that modifies tapon here place. So I'll go ahead, and if you guys don't understand and can't read along with the Greek, it's fine. Just listen to the narration then, and you'll be able to follow along. So offering a translation here of verse 8 again. By faith, so we're looking here at piste, this singular dative here, that's modifying hupekusin here. So by faith, Abraham, when he was called, so this is this kalumenos here would be a temporal adverbial participle here that modifies hupekusin here. And we could understand that Abraham was called first, and then subsequent to that, he obeys, and so he obeys by going forth to a place which he was about to receive for an inheritance. And it says, and he went forth now, and so we have epistamenos here. We have this from epistami. We have another adverbial participle, but this one's concessive in nature. So we'll translate it. And he went forth, although not knowing where he was going. So that's an act of faith here. So you're looking here at Abraham here at age 75, right? Setting forth, and Abraham, you got to tell his whole, his wife and his servants and all that, and said, hey, well, we're packing bags, we're moving. And so, everyone's going to, well, cool, well, where are we going? And he goes, well, I really don't know. So it doesn't exude a lot of confidence in your leader, and in your husband, if you're Sarah here and the slaves. But, so this puts Abraham at a loss here of looking at himself in terms of leadership. But sometimes God tells you to step out, and you got to take the first step, and then God will, in the process of obedience, then you will end up finding where you should be. But you got to put your step forward first. And we can see this. We'll look at the context here. This all comes out of Genesis 12, and it says here, Vayomer Adonai El Avram Lech Lecha. So this is the famous, passage Lech Lecha. It comes from this particular phrase here. Literally, go thou. In the old King Jimmy, get thee. From your land and from your descendants, okay, and from the house of your fathers. And then I'll just go ahead and translate here, El Haaretz, to a land which I will show you. Okay, so that right there, right here, Arecha here, I will, you're going to go. He's telling him to go, and he's telling him to go to a land that I will show you. All right, so this is where our author is making, this particular statement here, this concessive participle here, epistamenos here. This is it's all taken right here from Genesis 12:1. And then God promises here that, and I will make you a goy gadol, a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and we'll just say, and you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I shall curse, and in you all of the families of the earth shall be blessed. And Abraham went just as Yahweh spoke to him, and Lot went with him, and Abraham was 75 years old when he went out from Haran. So here he is after the death of his father. Remember, the initial move came from Ur the Chaldees, and that this calling basically came in two stages. That they then sojourned from Ur the Chaldees to Haran in northern Mesopotamia, and so Ur was the center of moon worship, and Haran was also a center of moon worship. So, Terach, his father, was a Moony. He was the first of the Moonies. He was a moon worshiper, and then God called him forth to go out, after the death of his father, and then they made their way down, to Canaan from there. So I'm sure Abraham had a general direction that he was going to go south from there, and follow the coast downward, and then God eventually led him to Shechem. So that's where he basically first set up shop. But anyhow, so I think in verse 8, the big thing to take from here is that we just read these verses so fast, but to actually take into account what's really going on here, he's packing bags at 75, and he's journeying with his whole family, and he does not exactly know where he's going. That takes a lot of faith, So that's why our author here puts in this particular concessive clause here, although not knowing where he was going. So we have basically this interrogative pu here is basically an indirect question of it's basically reported. So he's going here to some land that he had no clue exactly where he was to go. All right, and we'll continue moving on. And okay, so now coming here, now we're looking here at verse 9 here, and then it picks up here in fashion. By faith, he dwelt in the land of promise as we'll just say as being a foreigner. So there's a couple different ways we can construct this particular host clause here. It may be best here if we were to maybe follow here the thoughts here of Randy Leedy here, and then we could maybe look at this here as Usan. Excuse me, I misplaced my pen, and so I have to writing this in with my finger here, so I'm sorry. And then here we're going to have then alatrion. Okay, so I'm not going to bother here, I'm going to put a line here for alatrion. And actually then this is going to be be functioning here as a predicate adjective here, as being a foreigner here, predicate adjective that has substantival force. But anyhow, so this here, this phrase here, it can be reconstructed in different ways here. But we following Randy Leedy's way, we can look at then here that uson would be another adverbial participle that would basically link up here, followed by toi kasos here. And they would be functioning as, I think as manner here, is participles of manner. And so he's as being a foreigner, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, and then we have this, this appositional phraseology here, fellow heirs of the same promise here, and so we have this use here of autes here as identifying fellow heirs of the same promise here. So to this particular, this next verse here, what it does for us is that it shows that he's dwelling in this land of promise as a foreigner, and he's dwelling, in tents with Isaac and Jacob, his son and grandson, who are fellow heirs of the same promise. That because he's coming forth from Ur the Chaldees, and so he's coming forth from Ur III, dynasty in this big city, to living in the outback now, dwelling in tents. So this is quite a step of faith for Abraham, and that it tells us here that he dwelt the rest of his life for another 100 years, because he died somewhere about 175 years old. So he's dwelling here in Canaan for about 100 years and in tents, and he never, we'll find out here, he never actually, received the land. It never became theirs, not until the conquest, at the time of Moses. So it was Abraham was doing all of the prerequisite steps to, for his progeny and his seed to eventually, obtain this land that God promised them. So somebody's got to start the process. So this is how we should probably understand this verse. Okay, and so continuing on here, we'll look here. So we're basically looking here at verse 10. And so it opens up with a basis clause here. For he was awaiting a city having foundations, whose architect and builder was God. So basically, we have our baseline text here in verse 10a. For he was awaiting a city having foundations, and then it drops down into a relative clause here that goes back here to Poland here, and then this opens up here. The relative clause is just basically, they as I said before, relative clauses are basically connecting continuing the tissue of narrativity by means of the relative clause, and gives and fills out the more information for the basis clause here, offered here in 10a. And so when it does so here, it has a pair here of predicate nominatives, and it's the verb here is elliptical, so we have to supply it here. But that's just typical here for the Greek language. And then hotheos is definitely, in the text is placed first for emphasis, who's that he was awaiting the city, a divine city, whose architect and builder was God. So so Abraham wasn't going out there trying to make it himself. He was waiting for God to bring it about, because obviously he wasn't in a position to fight off this land wasn't to be taken by conquest at this particular time. He was, as the text said previously, he was sojourning in tents with his with Isaac and Jacob, his son and grandson here, dwelling in tents, and so he's doing that, awaiting this city that he was expecting God to bring. So so he, we'll find out here what happens, but these initial acts of faith, he could have, at this time, he could have said, wow, I left all this, I was living in this, Ur III dynasty city, this great city, of the world, and to be dwelling as a nomad, in tents, shepherding sheep and cattle, moving about, from place to place to graze and pasture the animals. So this is how he finds himself, but he knows he's obeying, that he obeyed God, and so he's ultimately waiting for for this city that God is going to provide, who's it's his architect and builder is God. So this is a big step of faith, that you're moving towards something that you don't have possession of. So he's always looking forward here to what God's going to do. And we can see from hindsight that it never happened in his lifetime. So he was just preparing the way for his descendants later to inherit this land. So as we said, just on the last slide, that you got to take a step, and things don't happen all at once or in one generation. Things take time before they develop, and boy, are they going to develop here in ways that he could not foresee. But he's still following the plan that God had for him. And so that's what we need to see. And so sometimes it's just by faith we're doing what we're doing. We don't maybe understand everything, but we know that this step of faith is preparatory to what's coming. Okay, now coming down here to verse 11 here, we're going to pick up here with Sarah, and like always, it starts off here, anaphorically here with piste here. By faith, Sarah also herself, sterile, received strength for the foundation of seed, being beyond the time of age, since she considered faithful the one who had promised. So we're looking here at this, looking back here at our base clause. So we have Sarah. She's the subject, and we're looking at her at her step of faith here. And then we have this, this adjunctive use of Kai here. Sarah herself by faith, and then aute here. This would be the intensive form. Sarah herself. So we start off by faith. Sarah also herself. Some translations might want to even put in Kai here, using its ascensive sense, by faith, even Sarah herself. So, either way here, however you choose to translate Kai here, assensive or adjunctive, but either one can do here. I would perceive, and then typically here, and so what did Sarah she receive? She received the strength or the power for the foundation of seed. So, obviously she didn't give the seed; she received it. So the typical phraseology here of for the foundation of seed is typically the male is the subject of this, but Sarah's on the receiving end of that, and so she receives the ability or the power or the strength for the foundation of seed, and this is all done by faith now. See, Sarah's acting in faith, even though she's beyond the time of age. Okay, she's at the time of Isaac's, and then she was conceived. I think she was about 90 years old. So, she was well beyond the time of age, and not only was she beyond the time of age, the text also says here, as well as, we saw back in Genesis, that she was stera, she was sterile. So there's a couple different things here, two different things here working against her. She's, beyond the time of age. This use of para here is a marker of comparative advantage here. We translate beyond or more than or in comparison to, but beyond here, beyond the time of age, is the way that we should translate para here. So by faith, she's able to get pregnant is basically what this text is saying, and then we have this causal clause here, subordinate causal clause with epi here. Since she considered faithful here, and this is the object complement piston, the one who promised, and this is the substantive use here of the participle, and so basically she's considering God, as the one who promised to be faithful, and so this is so this is all done by faith. So, she had to have her, her faith, she had to actually work, with this faith that she would actually, her and Abraham would have a child. So, you can imagine that, this is a pretty difficult situation here. Abraham's, 100 years old, 99 years old here, and and Sarah's 90 years old. It's incredible, and no wonder the child is Isaac, which means laughter, and she said that all women would laugh with me, because who would have thought that Sarah could have born a child in her old age. So by faith, here's an act here that receiving children is an act of faith, but it was based upon that because God had promised Abraham, hey, you're going to have a son, and and God even showed up one day, walking there with a couple angels there when he was, when he just after he had separated from Lot, and he was up on the mountain and looking down with God, over the Negev down there in the Jordan Valley where Lot had went, and so God had at that time had promised to Abraham that he would have a son in as it would be in the time of women. So that would be 9 months later here. So and so Sarah was disbelieving at the point, because she was laughing when she overheard God speaking this to Abraham when she was in the tent, and so Sarah, she eventually understood that she needed to believe God that that this would happen, and that that she would conceive and have this child. So with the this manifestation of God and the angels that accompanied him, she had the faith to believe along with Abraham for this child of promise. And so this is what this particular slide here has to say. And thank God she had a little divine help to impart to her a little more faith. Okay, now coming here to verse 12, we're going to go ahead and look at this diagrammatically, and we can see here that the subject is used in a simileic manner. Similes, we have here ta'as, or the stars, and the sand, he amos here, and so these there's a pair here of comparative conjunctions that are correlatively used together, kathos and hos, and this creates this simileic nominal phrase here that is going to be the subject here of genestheson here, egenestheson. And so it's a little difficult to put forward, and the best way in which to translate it is also to then use the impersonal use of the verb here, there were here, for egenestheson. So usually most translations are going to go something like, therefore, dia, okay, there were also born from one man and one who has been dead, just as the stars of the heaven in multitude, and as the sand, or we should say the innumerable sand, which is beside the lip of the sea. So that here would be a fairly decent translation, although it's very difficult. But to pick out that, we have here ta'astra and he hama or amos here. These are in the nominative form, and they supply the subject to egenestheson here. So whatever you do, this whole simileic, pairs here of these comparative conjunctions correlatively together, kathos and hos, for the stars and sand. They form the basis of this. And this is also goes back to Genesis 22 there with the Akedah of Isaac, the binding of Isaac, and so back there we have the same simile stemming from the promise that because Abraham had obeyed God, that then his descendants that stem from Isaac were going to be as innumerable as the sand beside the sea and the stars of heaven in multitude. So that's what's going on here. And then we have this other phrase here, prepositional phrase, and they were also born from one, and we'll say one man, and from one who has been dead in these things, or in in these matters would be a good translation, which is going to refer back here to the similaic phrase, that the back to the subject here of progeny and his descendants, and as we saw here, the similes here being used, that his seed would be as the stars of the heaven in multitude, and as the innumerable sand beside the sea. Okay, so this here is the construction. Now, specifically here for kai tauta necromenu here. So this here, this whole phrase here, this prepositional phrase, it's bifurcated, from one man and from one who has been dead, and we'll just say loosely in these matters. So I definitely secured the advice here from Dr. Randy Leedy, and so I'd like to. So I did just written him an email here, asking him a question here on this particular construction. And so he had written the following advice. So I think I'd render this something like, wherefore also there were born from one man, and a man who was dead in these things, in parentheses, a race like the stars of the sky in multitude, ... So he says the sentence diagram looks more parallel than the translation sounds. And so he's referring to tauta here, definitely. And because you can see here in these things here, so kind of datively he this is written or is translated here, and so he says the sentence diagram looks more parallel than the translation sounds. So you might want to insist on diagramming some other way, but I don't know of another way that's less problematic than simple coordination, as long as we're willing to let coordination expand a bit to include amplification, elaboration, rather than restricting it to simple listing of separate items. In my experience, letting grammatical categories expand just a little bit is necessary. Good writing doesn't lend itself to simple categorization into a relatively small number of tight categories devised by grammarians. Once you learn those categories, you can have some confidence about loosening their boundaries a bit. So he goes on from here, and he's very humble, and he says, I hope at last that the last paragraph makes sense. I struggled to find clarity as I wrote, and I'm not sure that I succeeded as well as I wanted to. So Randy, he's very, very, very humble man, and an excellent scholar. And you can find his work here if you go to on the internet, www.antiquegreekguide.com, and he has all his resources there. And I would definitely point you in his direction. And he's just a fabulous scholar, and I think a lot of people thank God for him and for his wisdom. So I definitely refer you to him, and he is a diagrammaticalist par excellence, definitely. So anyhow, please make yourself aware of this particular scholar and his works and that he has here, and please check him out. And you will be immensely, helped by his works. But anyhow, as far as this sentence here that we're looking at, we're talking about Abraham, and that basically Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born, and so this whole phrase here, nenekromenu, as from one who has been dead. So this is like a perfect passive participle here. Basically being used here, and it's not being used here as a concessive adverbial participle. So this goes along here with the preposition, so it's adjectival in nature. And it's used substantively as a noun, as one who has been dead. So this is referring to his reproductive abilities. Is that Abraham was 100 years old, and he's definitely beyond the time of bearing children in the normal sense that we would attribute to people. And we know that even after Sarah died, that Abraham married, I believe it was Keturah or something, but and he had more children afterwards. So God promised him seed, and seed is in multitude, like the stars and the sand, and so we usually attribute this to just to the promised seed, but I think we could expand that on beyond that. It's for all of the seed of Abraham. God blessed even Ishmael. So so we need to see that that Abraham's descendants were multitudes and multitudes, and in that it's all came from basically by faith, that basically it was an impossibility for Abraham and Sarah to have children, and so but because of Abraham's faith and Sarah's faith, they were able to conceive along with God's promise, and God then brought forth from an impossible situation, brought forth the promised child that God wanted to bring the covenant through. So the covenant, the promised child was not through Ishmael but through Isaac, because it was through Isaac and his descendants where they were going to be the custodians of God's covenant that God had made. But God still blessed Ishmael and Hagar's child, and even the angel of God appeared to Hagar, remember, and blessed her and the child as well. So this just shows here that that there's election, and but that doesn't mean that God doesn't bless even those who are unelected. They were blessed because they were Abraham's children, and just because of that, and how they behave, that's another separate issue, and I don't want to get into that big theological issue, but we can look at that. That's taken up in Romans and Malachi, and many other places, but we don't want to necessarily look at that. But we're just looking here at the incredible impossibility here, that from their old age that God was going to then fulfill this promise to him that he would have a son, and beyond all possible, beyond everything, at their old age, God did this. So it's to Abraham's benefit and tribute that by faith this was accomplished. All this had to Abraham had to exercise his faith, even though him and Sarah were both beyond the time of having children, and God did a miracle, and from that came forth, the all of the descendants that have been in the millions and millions. So that would. I would just, it's amazing. It's amazing what God can do. Okay, now coming to this particular slide here in verse 13, this begins our second major unit here for our study for today, and verses 13 to 16 are then, it's going to focus on the author's own commentary upon the faith of the patriarchs. So he's going to be commenting on their faith, and he makes a very provocative statement here in verse 13, and it says, "These all died in accordance with faith, though not receiving the promises, but by seeing them from afar and greeting and confessing that they were strangers and pilgrims upon the earth." So this is quite a statement to that they all died in faith, not having received the promises. But and then by we have these four here adverbial participles, and it's set in contrast from Lambontes here. This is the concessive use of the adverbial participle here, though not receiving the promises, but by comparison, by seeing them from afar, and greeting and confessing that they were, strangers and pilgrims upon the earth. So then, he's going to have this strong adversative contrast here. They didn't receive the promise, but although by seeing them, so we can actually look at this as these three adverbial participles here could be viewed as means or manner, by seeing them from afar and greeting and confessing that they were strangers and pilgrims upon the earth. So, Abraham knew that and communicated that knowledge that they were, that they were just there in preparation for the later generation that would come back and actually own it, because there was that condition that they could not own it at this point. It would not have been in God's act of justice that he would give this land to Abraham at this time, because there is a causal clause back there in Genesis, because the sins of the Amorites are not yet complete. So you just, God doesn't just give somebody land willy-nilly. It comes, the people who have possession of it have a right to it. But when they have sinned or they have, and in this sense, they have sinned so grossly, and so grossly in a manner that God determined that they would be eradicated from the human race, i.e. genocide. And in fact, yes, God did, he commanded them to genocide these, the Canaanites, the Pezerites, the Jebusites, and all the other termites. They were ordered to be killed, man, woman, and child. So that is God doesn't do that very often. it did happen at different times in the Old Testament. And remember with Agag, God told them that they were to blot out his memory from underneath heaven. So that there are times where people have so sinned and destroyed themselves through sin that they forfeit their right to live, and that they're ordered off the earth. So we're not, in the church age, we're not participating in that. That was underneath the old covenant. But the principle remains that God God does and has in the past commanded genocide to be made for the sins of people, God's the same yesterday, today, and forever, and this is how He governs the earth, and only He knows when such things should be done. But thank God the sword isn't in the hand of the church. But it was given to the Israelites, and they were commanded to do such things for the land of promise, but not beyond it. So anyhow, there's some things here that are when they did not receive the promise here. There's reasons why they didn't receive it. It wasn't. They couldn't receive it because the sins of the Amorites were not yet complete. But God wanted to bring them into the land preparatory so that they would have a right to it. That's how I would understand that. And so because of Abraham's faith of moving, then he became the next person in line to receive that land as an inheritance, and we can see that. As far as this genocide business is concerned, if you look there, at the Ammonites and the Moabites, that they displaced the some form of the Anakim, or we would say the Nephilim, from that lived there before, these giants, and God ordained that they would eliminate them from the land, in which they did. So it's not just Israel that God used one nation to commit genocide against another nation. He also used the Moabites and the Ammonites to remove the Emims and the Zinzumims, or whatever their names were, that were part of the Nephilim. Okay, so it's good for you to know that, and I think you should be very set in your mind that you don't make excuses for the Bible, and you don't make excuses for when God commanded certain people to be eliminated. They needed to be, and if they didn't eliminate them, they were going to be pricks in their side. So, don't get ahead of God's wisdom, and don't think that you need to make apologies for God. It's just terrible. I'm just, when I went to school, my professors, they went crazy over this, and they just they didn't understand sin. And when sin comes to a fruition, when the sins of a people are fulfilled, God determines that, we don't. So I'm not saying, this one needs to be gone. The sword's not given to the church. That was just underneath the Old Testament, and how God uses one nation to deal against another nation. The sword belongs with the state now. So those things have happened and may happen in the future. I don't know. That's God's business, not mine. Okay, so I just wanted you to understand why they didn't receive the promises. They weren't able to. It wasn't justifiable in God's sight to remove all of these Canaanites from the land at that time because they had a right to it, and they hadn't sinned so bad that they would have to be removed from it. But God in his wisdom, knew all that was going to happen, and so it all came about how it did, and that's human history. Okay, and now coming here to the following verse here, 14. It begins here with a basis clause gar. And so I'll go ahead and we'll work through this. For those who say such things make it clear they are seeking a homeland. And if they were mindful of that, we'll say, place from which they went out, they would have had time to return. But now they are desirous of greater things, of something, or we should say, of something greater. That is, of heaven, epuraniou here. Okay, so what we're looking at here is we're looking at a basis clause, and I guess we could say it's expounded by this chi here. It's connective, so it's further explaining the proposition set forth here for the basis clause for those who say such things, and gives further background to that here, and it has this conditional sentence here with the protasis here if they were mindful from that place, and then the apodosis, they would have had time to return, and then this is all bound together here in a mende construction clause here. So this is really tightly fit together here, and this is a hallmark of our author. He loves this mende construction, as well as the use of the condition here of a second class condition sentence here of contrary to fact. So he's been using this all along here throughout his exhortation. And so let's come back here. We'll look here at hoi legantes. So this is the use of the of the participle substantively, and it is here functioning as the subject here, and this refers back obviously to the patriarchs, to Abraham, and mainly to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and because it says for those who say such things make clear, and this is probably a hati recitative here, so we won't translate it, so it's just introducing direct speech as our author was inspired to do, that they are seeking a homeland. Okay, so that they're those who say such things, they're seeking out a homeland. And what is it that they say? Well, it said that they confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims upon the land or upon the earth. So and they were looking afar off, to the future. And so then he expounds this, talking about this homeland, and so when we come here, into the next sentence here, it said, and if on the one hand they were mindful of that place from which they went out, so we have this little prepositional relative clause here that expands this idea of the land from which they came out. So it's kind of going back to Ur of the Chaldees through Abraham here. Then the apodices, they would have had time to return. So they weren't mindful. They weren't looking back over their shoulder. They weren't second guessing their act of faith. See, if you second guess your act of faith, then you're not resolute in your in your faith. So I know that they were reminded constantly, like we all are. Are we acting in faith, upon what God has instructed us to do? And so, what the patriarchs did here was that they resolutely, they kept looking forward. They forgot what was behind, and they were sure of the promise, and so they didn't keep looking back to go back to where they were before, going back to Mesopotamia. Abraham, this really, I'm thinking really this, well, it would even, Jacob, spent a long time there with Laban and all that. But, we're talking in terms of Abraham here, I think. He's mainly looking at that. Abraham had 100 years. He could have returned back to Ur of the Chaldees, but he was convinced that he had done the right thing. So just don't keep looking back over your shoulder. Once you made the right decision, keep moving forward. That's what the author here is saying that the patriarchs did, and then that's what we should do. And then for the because this is a compare and contrast. So if on the one hand they were doing this, looking back over their shoulder, they could have returned, but now, okay. They're desirous of something greater, okay, and then that's clarified through this phrase here, tuta estin epuraniu here. So epuraniu here would basically be functioning in terms of apposition here, and remember it's something greater. So they're desirous of they're greater than what? Okay, it's something they're desirous of something greater from what they came out of, and so he ultimately says that it's they were looking forward to heaven. And so there's this, in the book of Hebrews, the heavenly city is what we'll see coming up here in the next chapter is that which will captivate our author. And like I think we said last time, the heavenly city, in terms of the book of Hebrews, remember every book doesn't give a complete eschatology, of everything, and it's just sparsely given, and it's only through biblical theology and systematic theology that you have to ultimately put it all together. And so here, we know ultimately at the end of the book of Revelation, the ultimate reality is after the new heaven and new earth, there is a city which comes down out of heaven. And so this is how I think this is what that our author here would we would understand this to be. The heavenly city would be the ultimate state past the millennial 1,000-year reign. This is looking beyond that, and our author doesn't get real deep into that in this book here, it's here and there little glimpses, and so we've talked about that earlier before, and so you're going to get some different different perspectives of eschatology out of this book, but we can see our author is firmly set on the eternal state here. So we'll say that. But remember what this slide here, what these few verses here are talking about is that, once that you put your hand to the plow, you don't look back. You set in faith, you set out on your course, and don't just be second guessing what God, your life of faith with God. Don't be second guessing that. Just move forward and believe that God has good things for us in the future. Okay, so coming here, this is what Abraham came out of. This is, this is here. This is here today. This is a picture here taken recently after the Gulf War. This is the remains here of the ziggurat at Ur the Chaldees. Abraham came forth from this magnificent city and this, this ziggurat, although it was, this was the center of moon worship, but it was a very cosmopolitan, way of life, and then Abraham was dwelling in tents. I just want you to be aware that, this is something that Abraham actually saw and witnessed, and this was the ziggurat here of Ur-Nammu. So anyhow, I just you need to see that Abraham could have looked back to what he had before, and if he would have been mindful, then he would have lost the promise, and would have happened. But such is the case. He didn't look back, and he sojourned in tents, because he was looking forward to a city that had foundations, whose architect and builder was God. So remember, the architect and builder of this ziggurat you're looking at was, stargazers, and moon worshippers, and so that's everything underneath the firmament. So Abraham was looking for a city above the firmament, okay, so that is of heaven, okay, and we'll read about that later. Okay, so therefore God is not ashamed of them to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. So this, it all ends here with this, this inferential conjunction. Therefore, it sums up everything. Okay, he's giving a deduction, conclusion, and summary of all that he talked about, and he gives a statement of how God thought about them, and God is not ashamed of them to be called their God. And then the basis for this, for he has prepared a city for them. So there's good things here to look forward to. Okay, and hopefully this has been a good session for all of us here, looking at the faith of the patriarchs. And I know we didn't finish up with the final acts of, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph there, but they all died. Giving, whether Joseph was giving instructions concerning his bones, or Jacob died, prophesying over the sons of Joseph there, concerning Ephraim and Manasseh. And then Abraham having offered up his son Isaac. These were the last acts of faith concerning the patriarchs, and so there's a beginning and end. And so Abraham's ultimate test was the sacrifice of Isaac. and he did so at great cost. And that is he is always he's the father of us all, according to Paul. Okay, and hopefully this has been a good session. If you have anything, like, share, subscribe. All right.